So I want to start off by saying I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up in a rough part of the Bronx. I've seen things that would make most people's skin crawl, and I never really lost sleep over much. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand how significant it is that what happened at that bowling alley genuinely rattled me. This was maybe 4 years ago. My coworker Darius had been bugging me for weeks to join his league bowling night. I'm talking every single Monday, this man would come into the office with some new argument for why I needed to show up. He wore me down eventually. I drove out to this bowling alley about 20 minutes from where I lived. It was one of those old school places that hadn't been renovated since maybe 1994. Carpet that looked like it had absorbed 30 years of spilled beer, flickering arcade machines in the corner, the whole deal. But there was something charming about it in a retro kind of way. Darius introduced me to the rest of his league crew. There was Harry, a guy named Pete, and a woman named Sandra, who apparently had been bowling competitively in her 20s. We were on lane 12, which was all the way at the far end of the alley, separated from most of the other lanes. The place wasn't too packed that night. A few families on the other end, some college-looking kids in the middle. It was pretty low-key. About an hour into the night, I noticed that lane 11, right next to us, had a single man bowling on it. He hadn't been there when we started. I don't know when he showed up. He was maybe mid-50s, wearing a button-down flannel that was too big for him, and he was bowling completely silently. No music from his phone, no reaction when he knocked pins down, just methodically picking up the ball, walking to the lane, and releasing it. Over and over. What was strange was that every time he finished a frame and went to sit down, he'd sit facing us instead of facing the pins like a normal person would. Harry noticed it first. He leaned over to me and quietly said something like, "Is that guy watching us?" I looked over casually, and yeah, the man was just sitting there, ball on his lap, watching our lane with no expression on his face. We kind of brushed it off at first. People are weird, no big deal. Then Darius went to bowl his frame, and when he came back, the man on lane 11 said, completely out of nowhere, "You're releasing too early." Darius kind of laughed it off and said thanks. But the man kept going. He said he'd been watching us for a while, that none of us had proper form, and that it was painful to watch. He wasn't saying it in a joking way. There was an edge to it, like genuine contempt. Sandra very politely told him we were just there to have fun. He stared at her for a second and then turned back to his lane without responding. For the next 20 minutes, the man didn't say anything else. But the sitting and watching thing continued. Every single time he finished a frame, he'd rotate on his seat and just stare in our direction. I made eye contact with him once by accident, and the man did not look away. I was the one who broke it. Then, at some point, I went to the restroom, which was back near the entrance of the alley. The restrooms were down a little hallway that was dimly lit, kind of tucked away behind the front counter area. I did what I had to do, washed my hands, and opened the door to leave. The man from lane 11 was standing directly outside the bathroom door, not walking past it, standing there facing it, like he'd been waiting. I nearly walked right into him. He looked at me and said, very calmly, "You shouldn't be here tonight." I said something like, "Excuse me," because I genuinely wasn't sure I'd heard him right. He repeated it, You shouldn't be here tonight." Then he walked past me toward the restroom, like nothing happened. I went back to the lane and told the group what just happened. Sandra's whole demeanor changed. She said something that she hadn't wanted to bring up before. That earlier, when I'd gone to get us a round of sodas from the concession area, the man had walked over to our lane and stood at the ball return for a solid minute, just looking at our belongings on the seating area. Pete had been the only one at the lane at the time, and he'd just kind of frozen up, not knowing what to do, until the man finally turned and went back to his lane. We decided to wrap it up. It wasn't worth it. We packed our bags and went to turn in our rental shoes. On the way out, I looked back toward lane 11. The man had gone back to bowling, except now he was bowling on our lane. Lane 12. He hadn't moved his name over to the screen or anything. He just started using our lane the second we vacated it. I don't know what that man's deal was. Maybe he was harmless and just deeply unsettling by nature. But "You shouldn't be here tonight" is not something you just say to a stranger in a dark hallway and have it mean nothing. I think about that sometimes. My friend group in college had this thing where we do a different activity every Friday night. One week mini golf, next week laser tag, whatever. Bowling came up on rotation fairly often because there was a 24-hour alley about 10 minutes off campus that was cheap and never too crowded late at night. This story takes place during one of those Friday outings. There were 4 of us, me, my roommate Kellen, and 2 girls from our floor named Priya and Dominique. We got there around 11:30 at night. The place was maybe a third full, which for a 24-hour bowling alley past midnight on a Friday was probably typical. We picked a lane, got our shoes, and settled in. This was one of those places with the automatic bumper system for kids, neon lighting, and music playing over the speakers. Pretty standard stuff. We were about 45 minutes in when Priya said she wasn't feeling great. She'd eaten something questionable earlier that night, and her stomach was bothering her. She went to find the bathroom and was gone for a while, which we figured was just her stomach doing what stomachs do in those situations. But then she came back looking genuinely disturbed, like the color had drained a little from her face. She sat down and quietly told us that when she came out of the bathroom, there was a man standing in the hallway near the back exit. Not unusual on its own, except that as she walked past him, he grabbed her wrist and asked if she wanted to come see something out back. She pulled her arm away and walked fast back to the lanes. She hadn't told any staff because she was shaken and just wanted to get back to us. Kellen immediately went to tell the front counter. One of the employees, a young guy who looked like he was in his early 20s, took it seriously and went back to check. He came back a few minutes later and said he didn't see anyone by the back exit and that the door was locked from the outside, meaning no one could come in that way, but you could go out, which meant the man was already inside the building. We stayed toward the front of the alley after that. There's safety in being visible, near staff, near other people. We talked about leaving, but Priya actually didn't want to be chased out. She was angry more than scared at that point, which honestly I respected. So we kept bowling but stayed alert. About 30 minutes later, I went to get a round of drinks from the little bar area they had on one side of the alley. While I was waiting, I scanned the place out of habit. That's when I spotted him, or who I assumed was him. There was a man sitting alone in the food area toward the back, eating something, wearing a dark zip-up jacket. He wasn't bowling. He was just sitting there. And he was watching our lane. I couldn't make out his face clearly from that distance. But something about the stillness of him, just sitting and watching, made the hair on my arms stand up. I grabbed the drinks and went back. Didn't point him out to Priya because I didn't want to freak her out more. But I told Kellen privately. He looked over casually and then looked back at me with an expression that confirmed I wasn't overreacting. We decided to leave as a group, intentionally. All four of us walking out the front entrance together, making sure not to split up. We told the employee at the counter again on the way out, described where the man was sitting, and left. I don't know what happened after that, whether staff did anything, whether the guy was just some regular with bad social awareness or something more sinister. But the thing that still gets me is the timing. Priya was alone in that hallway for maybe 90 seconds. That's all it took for someone to approach her in that way. It's the kind of thing that makes you realize how quickly a normal Friday night can pivot into something much darker. We still talk about that night sometimes. None of us ever went back to that alley. This happened to my uncle, and he told me this story when I was probably 17. He's not a dramatic person, not a storyteller by nature. He's actually kind of the opposite. Very matter of fact, speaks in short sentences, doesn't exaggerate, which is exactly why this one stuck with me. He used to bowl in a league back in the late 90s. Not competitively, just a casual after-work league that ran on Thursday evenings at a local alley. He did it for a couple of years. The alley had a bar attached to it, and a lot of the league guys would hang around and have drinks after the games. This particular night, his usual bowling partner called in sick, so my uncle was flying solo. He didn't mind. He knew most of the other guys in the league well enough to just plug into another group for the night. The alley assigned him to a lane with 3 other guys he'd seen around but didn't really know. 2 of them were friendly enough. A third one barely acknowledged him. What he didn't know at first was that there was a 5th person sort of orbiting their lane. Not bowling, not part of any league. Just a woman, probably in her late 40s or early 50s, who had positioned herself at the seating area of the empty lane directly behind theirs and was keeping score on a notepad, handwriting it out. My uncle noticed her early on, but figured she was waiting for someone, maybe a husband or friend who was in the restroom or something. Except she was there an hour later. Still writing. One of the guys on his lane, the friendlier one, leaned over to my uncle at some point and quietly said, "She's been scoring our game." He'd apparently gotten a look at her notepad while walking past. She had each of their names written at the top of a column, which was impossible because none of them had introduced themselves to her. She had all 4 of their names. My uncle said the way he described it. The air kind of went out of him when he heard that. He glanced over at the woman, and she was looking directly at him, pen still moving on the paper, like she'd been watching him the whole time. He went over and asked her directly what she was doing. She looked up at him and smiled. And he said it was the kind of smile that doesn't match the eyes, and told him she was just keeping score. He asked her how she knew their names. She looked back down at her notepad and said she'd been coming to this alley every Thursday for years, and that she knew all the league players by now. He said something like, "I've never seen you before." She said, still looking at the notepad, "I know." He walked back to his lane and told the group. The third guy, the one who'd been unfriendly all night, apparently turned completely white. He pulled my uncle aside and told him that 3 weeks earlier, the same woman had been there doing the exact same thing. Sitting behind the lane, keeping score. At the end of that night, she had walked up to one of the other guys in the league, man named Gerald, and handed him the notepad with his score on it. Gerald had taken it as a joke. 2 days later, Gerald had a heart attack in his driveway. He survived, but only barely. My uncle said he's a rational person. He doesn't believe in premonitions or anything supernatural. But he packed up his bag and left that bowling alley and never went back to the league. He said it wasn't that he thought she caused anything or knew something. It was just that some people carry a specific kind of wrongness with them that you can feel before you can explain it. And every survival instinct he had was telling him to be somewhere else. He said the last thing he saw when he walked out was her sitting there, still writing, and she raised her hand in a small wave without looking up from the paper. He still doesn't know how she had his name.